Thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name is Meredith Epp. I am the Sustainable Programs Officer here at the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, or APPGO for short. Today's webinar is on reducing the environmental impacts of packaging in Tasmania. We'll be talking a little bit about the obligations that you may have as a brand and as a brand owner in Tasmania and in Australia. We have some fantastic speakers. We'll also be sharing some information about APPGO. So before we get started, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we gather today and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land at which you gather, wherever you're joining us from across the country. So I'll just run us through our agenda here. So this morning we will be hearing from Katrina Oatley. Katrina will be giving us a bit of a government update from Tasmanian EPA. Then we'll be handing over to Leslie Fox. Leslie is the Partnership and Development Officer here at APPGO as well. She'll be speaking a bit about APPGO, the 2025 National Packaging Targets, and about collective impact and how you can make a difference on that. Then I'll speak a bit about APPGO, the programs and resources that are available to our members. And then we'll have a little interview session with one of our valued members, Andrea Jones, joining us from Mondelez. So I'll go ahead and hand over to Katrina. So Katrina is the Section Head of Environmental Policy and Support Services at EPA Tasmania. And she'll give us a little bit of a rundown of what's happening over there. Katrina, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Meredith. So firstly, I'm going to speak about how does co-regulation work in Tasmania. The National Environment Protection Council Act 1994 establishes a National Environment Protection Council, which is called NEPSI. This council consists of Commonwealth, state and territory environmental ministers, and each jurisdiction has one representative. Our Tasmanian NEPSI representative is presently Minister Roger Jensch, and he is the Tasmanian Environment Minister. NEPSI has two functions. Firstly, to make national environmental protection measures, which are called NEPMs, and secondly, to assess and report on the implementation and effectiveness of the NEPMs within jurisdictions. NEPMs are a special set of national objectives designed to help protect or manage aspects of our environment. All NEPMs are implemented by each jurisdiction. Examples of NEPMs include ambient air quality, ambient marine, estuarine and freshwater quality, general guidelines for the assessment of site contamination, environmental impacts associated with hazardous wastes. But today we're focusing on the NEPM from 2011 about used packaging materials. This NEPM has the aim of reducing environmental degradation from disposing used packaging and conserving virgin materials whilst encouraging reuse and recycling of materials. You're likely listening to this webinar if firstly you're a brand owner, which means that under the NEPM you're defined as an owner or licensee or franchisee of consumer products that are sold or distributed in Australia, or you supply packaging to retailers, or you're an importer or manufacturer of plastic bags, or a retailer who provides plastic bags to consumers. Or alternatively, you represent industries, eligible businesses or groups dealing with packaging, or who deal with recycling, for example, in the local council setups. You have two options in fulfilling the obligations within the used packaging materials NEPM in Tasmania. Firstly, there's the voluntary process, which is done through membership of the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, which is called APPGO. This is all via the Australian Packaging Covenant. This option will be discussed later in the webinar by APPGO representatives. As a brand owner, you must have an annual turnover of 5 million or more and produce or sell packaging or packaged products. The second process is the regulatory process. The NEPM is taken to be a state policy under Section 12A of the State Policies and Projects Act 1993. Under Section 44(1)(c) of the Environmental Management and Pollution Control Act 1994, which is called EMCA, it states that the Director of EPA can issue Environment Protection Notices, which are called EPNs, to ensure compliance with state policies such as NEPMs. The NEPMs and the packaging covenant ensure that producers, users and all levels of government share responsibility and management regarding the impacts of packaging and products from design to end of life for the benefit of our community and the environment. The NEPM provides a legislative framework to support the Australian Packaging Covenant, which is a voluntary industry-led component. Within this model of co-regulation, businesses are required to choose between becoming a signatory to the covenant or meeting equivalent compliance obligations under the NEPM via regulation by the state. One of the ways the NEPM supports co-regulation is to ensure that businesses that choose not to become signatories to the Australian Packaging Covenant cannot gain free rider advantage over those organisations that do opt to become signatories. During the course of this webinar, you'll learn about the reporting requirements under the NEPM and the additional support and resources available to your business or group provided by APPGO. This information will enable you to choose the most appropriate way to meet your obligations. What is the Tasmanian regulation and who is it relevant to? In Tasmania, the Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment, which is called DPIPWI, has a division, EPA Tasmania, which assists and supports the Environment Protection Authority in its regulatory obligations. The two relevant pieces of legislation in Tasmania for the NEPM are firstly, the State Policies and Project Act 1993 ensures that the NEPM has legal effect as a state policy pursuant to Section 12A. Secondly, MCA is used to impose requirements to give effect to a state policy. Under Section 44(1)(c), an Environment Protection Notice, which is called an EPN, can be issued by the Director of EPA. You are captured under this legislation if you are firstly a brand owner of consumer products or a retailer who provides plastic bags to consumers. Please note that in Tasmania we also have the Plastic Shopping Bags Ban Act of 2013, and there are statutory requirements for retailers and penalties can be issued under the Environmental Management and Pollution Control General Regulations of 2017. You are not captured under the Used Packaging Materials NEPM if firstly your gross annual income is less than $5 million or you are presently a signatory to the Australian Packaging Covenant. So what must you do? What are the key requirements in Tasmania? The 2025 National Packaging Targets will be discussed later in this webinar by APPGO, but basically 100% of packaging material will be recyclable, reusable or compostable. By way of summary, in Tasmania, you should become familiar with the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines, which are called SPGs, which are on the APPGO website and are freely available. These guidelines, according to the NEPM, assist the design, manufacture and end-of-life management of packaging, tackling the sometimes conflicting demands of market performance and cost, consumer protection and the environmental health while meeting the needs of a sustainable society. A waste action plan should be drafted by your business and state the baseline of use, recovery, reuse, recycling and the materials used and recovered. It will outline how your business will meet the targets for packaging. Additionally, any annual reports required by authorised officers will outline improvements in design, manufacture, marketing and distribution to minimise the environmental impacts of packaging, changes to protection, safety, hygiene, shelf life or supply chain considerations affecting amount and type of packaging, implementation of biorecycled purchasing policy or practices, adoption of the environmental codes of practice for packaging, establishment of baseline performance data and showing the demonstrated improvement and achievements of milestones in your waste action plan. All the records on packaging material used and recovered in your business must be kept and provided on request for 5 years. What are the reporting requirements? Part 4, Clause 16 of the NEPM is about recovery data for each financial year by the brand owner, and the information must be kept for 5 years include the total weight of materials used, recovered, reused and recycled, the number of units packaged for each material type, recovery arrangements and how recovered material is used, the total amount of embedded energy recovered and weight disposed to landfill, and how consumers are advised on how packaging is to be recovered. There's a special formula to calculate a brand owner's recovery rate in the NEPM. Sometimes it's not practical to distinguish between the brand owners of a number of packaging materials commonly collected for recycling. Therefore, it's acceptable to recover packaging materials which are of a size and type substantially the same as the packaging in which the brand owner's products are sold. What are the ramifications for not doing anything in Tasmania? The Australian Packaging Covenant applies to businesses of consumer packaging or packaged products that have an annual turnover of $5 million or more. These businesses must choose to either become a signatory of the covenant and contributing to the natural efforts in managing packaging waste, or meet compliance obligations under the NEPM, which is implemented via legislation in Tasmania through EPNs when a business sells or distributes products. Becoming a covenant signatory is a voluntary arrangement, but APPGO can assist your business in meeting its obligations. However, if you choose to meet your obligations under the NEPM via MCA, then an EPM will be issued to impose obligations upon you. These obligations will require equivalent outcomes to those being achieved collectively by members of the covenant. The EPA can take enforcement action against any brand owner who is not compliant. If a person, brand owner or business contravenes an EPN, then that person or business is guilty of an offence and is liable to a penalty not exceeding $86,000 for a person and $172,000 for a body corporate, which covers businesses. Non-compliance penalties imposed by the EPA may be reported on the EPA website, published in annual reports and also in the media. Non-compliant APPGO signatories are named on the APPGO website. Please also note that the EPA will recover from you the cost of preparing, issuing and ensuring compliance with any Environment Protection Notice. In summary, EPA Tasmania recommends and encourages that brand owners join APPGO so that they can meet the national packaging targets. APPGO has reporting tools and resources such as a web-based portal available to members, which the EPA simply does not have. Joining APPGO is not mandatory, but APPGO has the expertise to help you with your packaging obligations. I'll now hand you back to APPGO, who will explain the national targets for 2025 to you.
Great, thank you, Katrina. I'll now introduce Leslie Fox. So, like I mentioned, Leslie is APPGO's Partnership and Development Officer. She'll speak a little bit about the 2025 National Packaging Targets. Leslie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Meredith, and thank you very much, Katrina, for talking to us all about the obligations and how they stand within the EPA Tasmania as well. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is APPGO. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about the National Packaging Targets, which is the common agenda we are working towards in terms of reducing the impact of packaging on the environment. And finally, I'll talk about the collective impact model, which is the model of how we're all working towards together to achieve these targets. So what is APPGO? APPGO is a network. APPGO and its networks are working really to transform the way packaging is managed in Australia and reducing its impact on the environment. And we're delivering this through a whole supply chain or a systematic approach that requires participation from a diverse range of stakeholders, from government to industry, to the waste industry, to consumers. It's inclusive of really all stakeholders all across Australia's complex packaging value chain. And having these organizations work together to commit to a common agenda. At the moment, we've been around for some time now, and we've got over 1,500 members, and from a diverse range of industry types as well, from healthcare and scientific to logistics and manufacturing to telecommunications, industry associations, and food and beverages as well. We are a co-regulatory organization, so we help organizations like yourselves to meet your regulatory requirements. By signing the Australian Packaging Covenant, you automatically become a member of APPGO, You can meet your reporting and action plan requirements, and also access lots and lots of resources and support to help you with your regulatory aspects, but also to take steps to improve the impact of your packaging on the environment and to integrate sustainability into your operations as well. We are a partnership with state and federal government, industry and our members working together towards the national packaging targets and helping the environment as well. So what are the national packaging targets? Well, launched in 2018, they consist of 4 targets. We've got 100% of packaging to be reusable or recyclable or compostable by 2025, 50% average recycled content across all packaging, 70% of plastic packaging recycled or composted, and the phase out of problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging as well. So these are the targets endorsed by government, that government, industry, APPGO are working towards as a common agenda to reduce the impact of packaging on the environment. Where do they come from? Well, the packaging targets actually come from a lot of analysis and consultation in where we need to focus our attention to improve this impact of packaging. So if we look at the start here, we have about nearly 6 million tons of packaging is actually placed in the market. And a certain percentage of that is actually non-recyclable by design. It's 11%. So 11% of that is actually not recyclable by design. So it's automatically ending up in landfill as soon after it is consumed. Of this amount then, 5.3 million tons is recyclable, but it's not actually being collected for recycling. And that could be for a number of reasons. One of which is that consumers are pushing it into the wrong bin, for example, or there's limited collection services in that area. So that's another amount of packaging that's actually being lost when it could easily be recycled. And then there's a certain amount of waste that's actually being lost in the recovery process. Maybe it's too small, maybe it's just not of enough value that it doesn't make sense to some organizations to recover. And really what that means is what that leaves is about 2.9 million tons of packaging that's basically lost to landfill. And what we're working towards now is actually trying to make that a more valuable outcome and making them 2.9 million tons instead of going to landfill, actually re-entering in a closed loop system and basically improving the circular economy of packaging as well. So how are we tracking against the national packaging targets? Well, at the moment, our latest research has shown that we are now 89% of all packaging is 89% of all packaging is reusable, recyclable or compostable. 18% of Australia's plastic packaging is being recycled or composted. The target there is 70%, so we've got a bit of a way to go there. We're making great strides in terms of recycled content. 38% average recycled content is included in packaging here in Australia. And we're still at the foundation stage of the problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging. However, a number of governments now are taking steps to implement actions that will see problematic and unnecessary single-use plastic packaging phased out. So we should see some big action taken in this area now. So a lot achieved, but a lot more to do. And this is where we're actually talking about the collective impact model that I referred to earlier. And this is really about a collective impact where all stakeholders, groups, industry, government, consumers, APPGO itself are working together to deliver on the national packaging targets. So what the collective impact model is all about starts off with this common agenda that all participants have a shared vision for change, and that change is the national packaging targets. That there's consistent and open communication needed to build trust. So we are engaged in a number of activities such as working groups where we come together and are discussing solutions and barriers and opportunities in order to build trust and allow collaboration as well. We support mutually reinforcing activities. That's where collaborative projects and strategically aligned activities along the packaging value chain are there in order to support activities that would contribute to the national packaging targets as well. We also have acting as a backbone organisation, and this is where APPGO really steps in, where we coordinate and support participation businesses and organisations to work together, bringing people, basically everybody within the packaging supply chain that is needed together in order so that they can work together effectively and deliver on results. And finally, measuring results. Because we have the online portal, we record data regarding packaging from all of our members. And this data provides excellent insight into how we're tracking towards the national packaging targets, where new opportunities are needed, and really about providing this information so that it can be analysed and used to contribute to the targets as well. Our collective impact framework is very clearly mapped out in a document called Our Packaging Future, which we released last year. And it really outlines the whole packaging value chain and how we are collaboratively working to keeping packaging materials out of landfill and maximising on the circular economy of this material also. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. In our packaging future, we focus on 3 main outcomes that we're working towards. That is outcome number 1, packaging design for circularity. Outcome number 2, improved collection and recycling. And also outcome number 3, which is expanded markets for use packaging. And these are the outcomes that we're working together collectively to achieve. And there's a number of strategies that go along with each of them outcomes. So by delivering on these strategies, we can achieve these outcomes. And that is it. So that was just a quick summary of a little bit about the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, about the national packaging targets and the collective impact about how we're all working together to achieve these packaging targets. I'll now hand you over to Meredith Epp, our Sustainable Programs Officer, who will talk to you a lot more about how you can get involved in APPGO as a member and the benefits of that.
Great, thank you, Leslie, appreciate that. I'll just let my video come back on here in a second. Joe? There we go. All right. So thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Katrina, both for some fantastic insights there onto what the regulation is and a little bit of background around APPGO. I'll speak now about the benefits of APPGO membership and what the membership value is like. I'll talk a little bit about the access to programs that you have as an APPGO member and also access to resources. So before I dive too quickly into the value of APPGO membership, I think it's important to recognize that there are a few obligations. So when you sign up to become an APPGO member, you have really 3 core obligations. Your first one is to pay an annual membership fee, and that's based off the size of your organization and your total annual turnover in Australia. So first is an annual fee. The second is an annual report, which is usually on the 31st of March each year. Off the back of that annual report, you're asked to submit an action plan, and the action plan takes the information from your annual report and makes suggestions in terms of how you can improve for the next year. So those are your 3 core obligations as an APPGO member. But some of the real values around that, we've broken it down into these 3 pillars. So the first pillar is looking at that it helps you to drive sustainability. We know that consumers and investors and government are even looking more and more to sustainability. Consumers are making purchasing choices. Investors are looking for sustainability strategies. How are you future-proofing and reducing risk? So driving sustainability and being part of APPGO and using something like your APPGO annual report helps you to verify and to show evidence base in terms of how you're actually tracking against your packaging sustainability goals. So it enhances brand reputation. It helps you to track your progress and uphold that commitment. So committing to the 2025 targets through the APPGO annual reporting tool, you're able to see how you're tracking against the targets and areas of improvement. But you're definitely not alone either. So that also lets you have access to the other 1,500 members that are part of APPGO's organization, as well as a wide network of academia, of government, of industry associations, community groups, and other not-for-profits. And that really it's about growing this growing demand for sustainability from suppliers, customers, and stakeholders. So value of APPGO membership, number one, is driving sustainability. That second part, again, is around access to networks and resources. I mentioned you have access to APPGO's wide network that's working in this collective impact model. But on a very practical level, you also have access to technical guides, APPGO events and webinars. We also host working groups and advisory groups on a number of different issues. So you have that access to the network, and if you ever have any problems or questions, there's also the APPGO Member Services team. So a dedicated team that's here to help you work through your reports, work through any tricky questions that you might have around packaging sustainability and the covenant. And that last bit, just like Katrina was speaking about before, it helps you to meet those compliance regulations. So it helps you to meet your regulatory obligations by completing those annual reports on packaging. So a few key values of APPGO membership. Another thing that Katrina mentioned was the sustainable packaging guidelines. And the sustainable packaging guidelines are out there in the public domain. They're accessible for anyone to use. And by signing up to a signatory of the covenant or becoming an APPGO member, you agree to use the sustainable packaging guidelines. But it shouldn't be a scary thing. It's actually something that will potentially save you money, create efficiencies, and help your business to have better relationships with your suppliers and customers. There's 10 principles within the SPGs, or the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines, that are almost like little tick boxes. You walk through the different areas of the SPGs, and it helps you to better understand your packaging. For example, if you're packaging up a product, maybe a candle, and it's in a cardboard box, and you realize that you might have to put a plastic sleeve around that, but maybe the plastic sleeve doesn't actually serve a purpose. So by using something like the SPGs, you're able to identify cost savings and also have a positive environmental impact. There's a number of supporting resources on specific material types as well. So if you're working in a specific type of plastic or paperboard, there are supporting detailed resources on that as well. Another benefit of APPGO membership is actually driving results. So by filling out your APPGO annual report, what we've seen year on year is that APPGO members actually are improving their sustainability scores and their sustainability impact. So what you see on the graph here is in the dark blue are for small businesses, light blue are medium businesses, and the green is large businesses, and that's for the tenure of APPGO membership. So you'll see over here on the sidebar for members that have been part of APPGO for over 9 years, they're having consistently higher scores than those members that haven't been APPGO members as long. Another key benefit of APPGO membership is the Australasian Recycling Label Program, or the ARL. Now you may have seen this label out and about. It's on a number of different products that Andrea can talk to us a little bit about what they've been doing in that space. But you'll see that on a number of different products, food and beverage, personal care, all across the board. And the Australasian Recycling Label is exclusive to APPGO members. So you can only be an APPGO member to access the program. It's a trademarked logo that has evidence-based to verify your recyclability claims. So as an APPGO member, you have access to a back-end online portal where you can put in all of the information about your packaging. So the weight, the colors, the inks, if there are any adhesives for the labels, and that will then spit out a recyclability evaluation, and therefore you could use one of these different labels. So if your box might be recyclable, your wrap could be conditionally recyclable, meaning you need to take it back to a store to be recycled through potentially a red cycle soft plastics collection program, or it just goes in the bin. This is a really important program for any business that wants to really clearly communicate to their customers what to do with their packaging at the end of life. This also has a lot of great support from federal, state, and local government, as well as not-for-profit groups. And we're seeing more and more brands incorporating this into their own branding and their sustainability strategies. And I'll just finish off here with one other example about collective impact. And I had the pleasure of working on this project a couple of years ago. So Leslie mentioned collective impact. It's all about those networks and measuring results consistently, and also having clear targets that we're working towards. So the wine industry understood that they were the 2025 national packaging targets, and they all said, we want to work towards these targets, but I think we could do it better if we work together. So there were hosted a couple of different workshops. Around 25 different businesses joined the first workshop, which led to a brainstorming session where they started going all the way through the packaging value chain. They started off at the vineyard, understanding what types of packaging was used there, then through the different parts of the supply chain, all the way when they ended up at the retail bottle shop. They were then able to identify a few areas where they could potentially improve their packaging sustainability. So that included looking at the cling film that was used on a pallet. So how many times did they wrap the pallet? Obviously, you need to do that for health and safety so that the boxes don't fall off a pallet. But could they put a bit of recommendations around how many times that should be done for health and safety, and therefore eliminate potential use of excess packaging? Another one was waste at point of sale and the need for greater data transparency. So they all worked through to work closely together. And even one of the organizations here in the projects was able to secure some grant funding from a local not-for-profit organization as well. So it really is that idea of collective impact and industry coming together. It wasn't all necessarily working together previously, but they were able to have success working towards the 2025 targets. So I'll leave you with that, but we will now introduce our fabulous guest speaker, whom I'm thrilled to have with us today. I've met Andrea a few times before, and she is a fantastic sustainability advocate. So Andrea, I'll just ask you a few different questions. All right. So Andrea, maybe you can just start off by telling us your name, your role, and a little bit about the company that you work for, just for context.
Sure. So my name's Andrea Jones. I work as a packaging technologist for Mondelez. I've been in my role for about 15 years, and I support the chocolate moulded category through end-to-end packaging solutions. And a big focus that I have now is sustainability.
Fantastic, Andrea. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience as an APPGO member?
Yeah, Mondelez has been an APPGO member since 2011, and they were previously members of the National Packaging Covenant prior to that. So during my 15 years as a packaging technologist in a FMCG company, my experience with APPGO has been very rewarding. I've benefited greatly from the access to the APPGO training guides and events. I've had the opportunity to network with industry stakeholders and participate in working groups to have a voice on how packaging is managed in Australia.
Fantastic, thanks Andrea. And then could you talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you would see as APPGO membership?
I can, and I think you've covered those very well in the presentation. However, I'd reiterate that, as I mentioned previously, the APPGO technical guides, the training and the events, the building knowledge and awareness while creating introduction to industry subject matter experts is so valuable. The support that we get through our regulatory tracking and obligations. We get to participate in working groups to help make recommendations on what regulation should be. We collaboratively work to drive progress in the sustainability area. And this is really personally important to me. And without APPGO, we wouldn't have programs like the Plastic Pack Project, that they just wouldn't be driven. And as an FMCG business, we use very high volumes of soft plastics, and APPGO are key to help us understand the new technology available, the use of partnering with other industries with similar challenges, and to support the correct infrastructure requirements to deal with the soft plastic challenges that we all face. But my favourite is absolutely the ARL, or the Australasian Recycling Labelling, and the prep tool that gets used to help you with that labelling. I passionately believe that we must have a unified approach to recycling education and branding for consumers to correctly dispose of their packaging. And as the previous slides show, that it's one thing for an item to be recyclable, it's another thing to have it end up in the right disposed method, so we can work towards closing this circular economy.
Fantastic, Andrea. And I know you've been a huge champion for getting the ARL on a number of our favourite products as well. So
it has been, probably the last 12 months has been a key focus of mine to design the program for Mondelez and to roll that out across the business. The tools and the support have been phenomenal. I have asked many crazy questions. I have never been felt to feel silly about those. I'm proud to say that we have over 600 packs out in market now that have been updated, and I love to see it on all products within in the supermarkets and things. I talk about it. I'm a real advocate for it, and can't talk about it highly enough.
That's fantastic. And it's champions like yourself, Andrea, that I think are what's so great about being part of this APPGO network, is that you get to meet individuals like you and learn from people that have really driven this change throughout their organization. I guess my last question for you is, we'll have mostly everyone listening to this may not have heard of APPGO before. What's your advice to them if they're looking to join APPGO or make this decision?
My advice would be to consider the benefits on how APPGO support and enhance your business. And I think a really important example, or a good example there, is the annual reporting and action plan around how we track packaging use and the types that you use, because the benefits to be able to articulate areas for progress, forward planning, volume reduction, replacing bad plastics with good, they're critical to stay on top of being an industry leader in sustainability.
Well, fantastic, Andrea. We really appreciate you being here and shedding some light firsthand on what it's like to be an APPGO member. So I think I'll open it up now to the group and invite our other speakers to come back online, and we'll head into our Q&A session now. All right. So a few kind of questions that have come through already. And thank you again, all of you, for your fantastic presentations. Katrina, this one might be one that would be well suited for you. You touched on this a little bit, but are the 2025 targets mandatory for all businesses in Australia or only for APPGO members?
They're required by, if you've got an annual fees of annual income of over 5 million, then it's just the same. It's essential consistency between everything that APPGO does. So the reporting requirements are the same under the covenant, whether you do it through APPGO or through the state. And so under the covenant, you can't be competitively disadvantaged, which means that free riders, which are basically businesses that, who may get an advantage without paying for being a member of APPGO, that just can't happen. So the EPA is very keen on issuing EPNs if necessary to make sure that it's an equal playing field for all businesses, to make sure that and encourage businesses to comply with the obligations that are required.
Thanks, Katrina. Andrea, maybe another question for you here. So how does APPGO help you to communicate sustainability to your customers?
Great question. Again, definitely through the ARL and the prep tool. that harmonised approach, so important and so user-friendly. The targeted campaigns and advertising. I know around Easter and such, there's some great advertising that goes out to promote how to deal with all that Easter egg foil. You know, you've got to scrunch it into a ball. You can't just throw a little piece of foil into the recycling and think it's going to end up where it should. And then a key importance is driving industry with a common vision to close the loop. The circular economy of packaging is the key next step. It's one thing to recycle, but we have to close the loop.
Fantastic. Thank you. One more question. So they're saying, APPGO mentioned that they offer resources. So Katrina, are there any resources to help companies who report under the state legislation?
EPA Tasmania doesn't have any reporting tools or resources. APPGO has wonderful tools such as the portal and things like that I mentioned before, but EPA Tasmania doesn't have any. So that's why it's really helpful for businesses to join APPGO so that they can access those kind of resources and tools.
All right, and then the final question here is just what's involved in APPGO reporting and how is that different if I reported to the state? So I can speak a little bit about, like Katrina mentioned, APPGO reporting through APPGO is through an online portal that happens around the 31st of March each year. An online portal, we've just finished off a webinar series, so there's a number of supports from the APPGO member services team around reporting, probably about 100 odd different resources and Excel sheets, Word documents, different things to help you create your reports. And then that report again feeds into an action plan, and all that's done through a member portal where you can watch videos. It's kind of a big knowledge hub of information there. So I guess in terms of reporting to the state, Katrina, could you just speak a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. Look, it'd mean that a business who's not a signatory would be issued with an Environment Protection Notice, which is an EPN, and that would be the regulatory way that EPA Tasmania could actually progress that. So any requirements such as reporting, annual reports, and waste action plans and things like that could be covered off in an EPN. And then if there's any breaches of that, that's when there's penalties that I've outlined in my presentation. And hopefully we won't go down that route and everybody will become APPGO members.
Yeah. Well, we certainly hope so. We would love to have everyone that's on the line here and listening to this webinar join us today. Leslie, I might hand over to you if there are any closing words that you'd like to make. Otherwise, we encourage you to go check out the APPGO website. You can find an online membership form there. And if you do have any questions around next steps, you can get in touch with the different government entities or with APPGO there. But Leslie, anything else from you?
No, just thank you very much to Katrina and Andrea for taking the time to speak to us today. I think it's great to hear from a member's perspective and also from the Tasmanian government on the on a little bit more about the regulation there. Thank you, Meredith, for hosting today and for also coordinating the presentation today. APPGO membership is a fantastic option for you to meet your regulatory requirements. We do have a team ready to respond to any inquiries, so feel free to contact us at any time if you have any questions. And we know that this can be sometimes a little bit complicated, but there is options for you, and you can meet your requirements and become compliant and not have to worry about it anymore. So lots of options for you, and I'm happy to discuss them more with you whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Leslie. Thank you, Katrina and Andrea as well for joining us. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.